They're still fighting, folks. They're still in it.
Yeah.
I mean, we expected that, right? It would have been a little disappointing if they weren't still in it. But the Yukon Huskies, of whom their fight song I had to just blast to open up this pod, we are still fighting. We are still in the mix for the back-to-back. And we're going to get into some March Madness stuff here in a little bit, Pat. A little football, a little March Madness combo show. This is probably the heaviest other than football topic show we'll have, I think in the entire offseason, but that's because March Madness kind of lends itself to that. And we've got some stuff to react to and talk about.
Yeah, jam-packed show here.
It's going to be a good one. So look, we'll have a March Madness recap after we get through some football stuff. The March Madness stuff, just to preview, it is a little chalky, I will say. The tourney has delivered a few moments, a few little games here, but overall it's been a little bit chalky.
And I honestly don't mind that. As fun as March Madness is, the only detractor I have of it is just the fact that a lot of times the best team or one of the best teams don't win. Mm-hmm. I mean, you see that in other the professional leagues where there's multiple game series, things of that nature. But 5-seed UConn winning last year was fine, of course. But you typically want to see one of the best teams winning, and this year is kind of trending in that direction. I'm okay with it. It's still been a good tournament, I think. I'm having a good time.
No, to me, it's not even that some of the best teams don't win. Because if you look throughout history, it is majority 1 and 2 seeds that win it, other than UConn. We're pretty much the only team that routinely makes a habit out of winning it as a 5 or lower seed. But I think, to me, the one thing about when tournaments are less chalk is you are deprived of some of those great matchups that you could get. Inevitably, look, I love upsets, and if you ask me to choose between upsets or no upsets, I will choose upsets. But you do get deprived of seeing the best teams play the best teams, and some of those matchups are great, and just those underdogs flame out. They do flame out eventually, and that's just kind of the nature of it. Even the ones that manage to reach the Final Four, like your VCUs and such, those games where they get eliminated end up not being the best. So I could take it either way. I'm just happy UConn's in it, to be honest with you. And look, this has not been a light week of football news either. Honestly, most of it coming in the last 2 days in the form of rule changes. So we'll get into some NFL rule changes and some other updates, and then we'll get into our March Madness recap, and then we'll even do a little March Madness Legends draft. Some guys who really made their name in the tourney, and really only in the tourney, I think, is kind of the direction we're going with that.
Yeah.
But we'll get into our news here real quick, and because I'm a great producer, here's Ron Burgundy.
Good evening. I'm Ron Burgundy, and this is what's happening in your world tonight.
Okay, so some rule changes got passed for this upcoming season, and I want to preface this with a report that came out from Pro Football Talk a couple days ago, because I think it's a relevant way to frame these rule changes. I think this is no coincidence. So there was a report from PFT that the NFL was concerned about scoring. Competition Committee Chairman Rich McKay saying statistically what gives us concern a little bit is scoring. Scoring this year at 43.5 points per game is still above a historical marker, which has kind of been that 43 mark, but we were at 49 points per game during COVID, and we went to 45 in 2021, and then 43.76 last year, or in 2022, and now we're down to 43.54. So there has been a steady decline, and Pat, they are certainly addressing this, whether intentionally or unintentionally. I'm sure it's at least a little bit intentionally.
There's always a motivation.
Absolutely. So the rule that really caught the internet by storm is the ban of the hip drop tackle. This one came out yesterday, Monday, that the NFL was doing this. And essentially, to describe what the hip drop tackle is, they define it, the NFL does, as wrapping one or both arms around a player, twisting or rotating your own body, being the defender's body, within the motion of that tackle, and then landing on the offensive player's lower body. So essentially using all your body weight to twist them down, and then landing all your body weight on that player's lower body. I have mixed feelings about this because, look, the initial reaction here is that, and this is what I think the biggest problem with it will be, is that there are certain situations where your only choice, I believe, is a hip drop tackle or no tackle, and you're just kind of forced to let a player go. You look at any situation, really, where a defender is kind of chasing down an offensive player in the open field or from behind. I think the odds of a hip drop tackle occurring, or at least a tackle that the referees could interpret as a hip drop tackle occurring, are pretty high. And now you're asking players to think, again, in a bang-bang sport, about how they're going to tackle a guy and whether it's worth a fine, a 15-yard penalty, or whatever it may be. I think it's going to be really tough to kind of keep yourself from doing this as a defender in a lot of situations. And I just think when that becomes your only option is an illegal tackle or not tackling at all, I think you've got a dicey rule when those become your only options.
Yeah, see, I understand it from the perspective of like, hey, this tackle is causing more injuries, so we need to ban it. If you look at it just from that perspective, sure. But there are, like you said, there are so many more layers to that. And I think the other thing is that yet another judgment call in a sport chock full of judgment calls. Like, these officials have enough on their hands now. How are they going to be able to distinctly notice in real time? Like, even watching, you don't realize it. Like the Mark Andrews, when Mark Andrews broke his leg, that was on a hip drop tackle. I didn't know it until they said it after the fact. Like, you're not watching the game and go, oh, that's a hip drop tackle. And I don't truly think any of these defenders go into a tackle thinking like, hey, I'm going to do a hip drop tackle and I'm going to hurt this guy. Like, 100%. It seems like a far more natural tackle rather than headhunting. Which, you know, because like headhunting, you're just launching your head straight into that guy's head. Like, yeah, there's a bit more, it seems there's a bit more of a conscious effort than that, as opposed to a hip drop tackle, which is kind of like a tackle. Like, you know, it's not, even just from the enforcement thing, they say this shouldn't be even called all that often. It's like, but you know damn well there's going to be in a big moment in a big game where there's going to be an iffy call on a hip drop tackle. And again, like, just looking from the perspective of like, we want to reduce injuries. Great. I don't want to see people breaking their legs like that, but I just think it's going to open up a big can of worms.
Yeah, and to me, here's the problem with it, Pat. I think you put that perfectly, is like the NFL is saying they did a full film review and they looked into how often these tackles are happening, and that was how they determined that they cause injuries more than any other type of tackle. Well, they said they only see the tackle about once per game. This past season, they only saw it about once per game after all their reviews and all their research, and that even that is up by 65% year over year. So it's increasing, even though it's only one per game.
It might go up and up and up, though.
Sure, you could think that it's going to keep going up. Here's my issue, right? Because when you hear that number that they determined it only happens once per game, you're like, okay, then it shouldn't affect it that much. My problem with that is they determined they only see it once per game after, in theory, meticulously reviewing all these plays, all these tackles, and being like, that's a hip drop tackle. Okay, there's the one per game, whatever. Oh, this game had two, whatever. In the moment, I think referees are going to have a lot harder time distinguishing that.
Exactly.
Like, you are like the NFL. Yeah, they have the luxury of saying these are the ones that we definitively decided are hip drop tackles. Okay, in a live game situation, I'm sure referees are going to see at least 3 to 5 tackles per game that they have to think about it and be like, ooh, was that one? Do I have to call that? How are we going to do this? Like, I think it's just very optimistic to kind of present it to people that this is only going to affect maybe one play per game until it gets legislated out of the game and legislated out of muscle memory.
Exactly, and you look at some of the other things that have kind of been more heavily enforced. Obviously, the headhunting. Even then, we've seen some bad calls. We have seen some times where a player did not
right at the
lead with
shoulder,
their helmet,
yeah,
or they hit him with the shoulder. And then we'll talk more about the roughing the passer. That one has been dreadful. There have been some hideous rushing the passer calls. I just don't want this to become the next thing. Like, we don't need something like this taking away the quality of the games, because that's what some of these roughing the passer calls have done. Is really, you leave the game with a sour taste, thinking like, oh man, that wasn't a good way for that game to end. And you know this is going to happen. And yet they sit here with this MetLife turf that takes guys' ACLs like it's its job. Oh, and that's okay, I do not see. And it's like, and then you see this, it's like, again, I get it. You want less people to get hurt, so do I. But like I said, it's just going to be a sticky situation.
It's tough because it is a result of player, and I made a joke out of this in a video I made this week. It's a result of players having to adjust to the other rules the NFL's already made. Like you said, hitting high, not allowed, and rightfully so. We want to avoid the head and neck. Totally agree. You're not allowed to hit low on quarterbacks at the very least, because that's roughing the passer. And, players I think have, even when it's not a quarterback, like they've probably kind of led themselves to, okay, I'm not going to go for guys' ACLs because why would I do that? So they go for the middle. They go for the waist. And what happens when you start tackling a guy at the waist? Inevitably, you're going to drag a guy down and land on his lower body sometimes. It's just they are trying to seemingly, maybe not actively, but seemingly trying to get rid of just every possible way you can tackle a guy other than just like pushing him to the ground in the open field. It's like that is not a viable way to tackle some of the best athletes in the world.
And you want, again, you want to minimize injury as much as possible, but at the end of the day, football is an inherently violent sport. Like, you can only do so much to take the violence. Again, outlawing hits the head. No brainer. Outlawing hits below the knee. Smart. A lot of players have gone on the record saying, I'd rather get hit high than low. So that makes sense too. But now you're going to start, there's going to be jurisdiction over what you do with people's midsections.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it's just going to be, I think it's just going to be more trouble, but maybe it'll be a thing where it is just once a game. And this is something that we don't talk about very much throughout the year. But again, just knowing things that have happened, there's going to be a judgment call in a big time.
No, the NFL referees and the NFL in general definitely have not earned the benefit of the doubt that they are going to handle this new rule well, based on some of the things we have seen with roughing the passer. Now, they have said that their goal is, to not call this in the game that often, and that the way they may legislate it is via fines after the game, which we have seen for, certain hits that weren't even penalized during a game that they end up reviewing after that were hits to the head. Like, that, if they can do that with this sort of play, then great. But the fact that it's being established as a rule, it's not just going to be called after the game. That's just not how it's going to work. So, I mean, look, if they could stick by their word, that would be wonderful. But I just think we're all a little smarter than that at this point.
NFL officiating is questionable enough as it is. They've got a lot on their plate. Football is a very, very intricate game, and this is just another thing on top of it. I don't know.
Yeah, and what could go wrong with a type of play that, the NFL themselves admitted you can't give the officials any reps to call because it's not something that's going to happen in padded practices. It's not something that's it will only happen maybe in preseason games, but even then teams aren't going all out enough. I mean, I don't know that you'll see it much there either. At the very least, they will only have a very, very small amount of reps to try to get this right, and that just tells me it's probably not going to go very well. So we'll see how much impact the hip drop tackle actually has once the season begins, but I think it's definitely not inspiring a lot of faith and a lot of goodwill among the fans. Another massive rule change was the kickoff rule change. So the NFL is going to essentially mirror the XFL with only some minor changes.
What a crazy timeline.
I know. I mean, look, they said when the XFL started, like, they were basically using it as a testing ground. I didn't think that it would, yield anything major like this, at least not so quickly. But what the new kickoff rule is, essentially it will remove the fair catch and drastically improve the offense's starting field position. So kickers will continue, this is the rule, just to summarize it, kickers will continue kicking from the 35, as they have, but the rest of the kickoff team will line up at the opposing 40-yard line, so basically nowhere near the kicker. Then at least 9 players from the receiving team will line up in the setup zone between the 35 and the 30. Then up to 2 returners, so either 1 or 2, can line up in the landing zone, which is between the goal line and the 20. Here's the key. No one can move other than the kicker and the returner until the ball is either in the returner's hands or the returner muffs it or it hits the ground. So until the ball is essentially, in play from that kicking point, nobody can move. And then, what is it? After that, touchback. If there is a touchback, it will go to the 30. No fair catches allowed. So, and if a ball does go into the end zone, I believe the player actually has to go in and grab the ball and down it there. So you can't fair catch it in the end zone or anything like that. So the NFL, what they're trying to do with this is encourage returns while keeping them safe. And look, I think this rule change coming out a day after the hip drop tackle gave it a lot of negative response. I'm okay with this one. I think this is a rule change for me that, look, we've seen the kickoff be watered down and watered down and watered down over the years. To me, I just kind of expected a major change was coming at some point. I'm okay with trying this one out for a year. I don't see any major downside to it.
I am too. I don't have super strong feelings about the kickoff. If they said, hey, we're just no more kickoffs, teams just start with the ball at the 25, even then I'd be like, okay. I don't just with how, kind of useless they've become in the last few years. And I get it because again, with their research, statistically, the most injuries occur on these kickoffs. And, like, I get it. Guys are getting blindsided, you know. And I understand, again, from a player safety perspective, but it got to the point where, like, why even bother? And that's why I thought we were kind of going to be trending in the other direction, where eventually we're just not going to see kickoffs anymore. But does it feel kind of gimmicky? Yes. But, I mean, I feel like any kind of change in football is gonna feel gimmicky just because of something that we've known for so long. But I'm okay with it too. I mean, we'll see if it actually does, produce more kickoffs, more returns. I mean, and also it paved the way for a beautiful. Did you see the beautiful reunion that's happening in Pittsburgh between our boy Artie Smith and Cordero Patterson? Najee Harris season. Jalen Warren season, it's Cordero time, baby. It is Cordero time.
Yeah, that one, I don't know. Cordero was like barely involved with the Falcons this year, but he'll at least be the kick returner. I mean, I'm sure in Pittsburgh. Yeah, look, this play is definitely going to look a little odd, a little gimmicky, a little silly when we first see it. Because Pat, I recall vaguely us talking about kickoffs, way back, and I mentioned how, like, it's such an iconic image to start a game, the kickoff. Like, you'll have sometimes it'll be like a drone shot or just a well zoomed in shot of, the kicker runs up to the ball, the whole, coverage team starts sprinting down the field. It's just a great image. And this
definitely the most hyped start of a game, yeah.
Yeah, picturing the difference here of it just being a bunch of dudes standing still, except the kicker, is kind of funny, and it's going to look a little weird. Look, the XFL has some proof that this works. I saw a chart today of, like, it was team by team how many kick returns they averaged per game, and they combined the XFL and the NFL into one chart, and all 8 of the top teams was the XFL teams at either like 4 or 5 kick returns per game per team, and then every NFL team was at like 1 or less, or maybe a little over 1 in the decimal place. But they have some anecdotal evidence that it will work. I think it's going to work. I mean, kick returners, they're incentivized to bring it out. And I like that part of it. Look, I think we all love a good electric kick return. And if this is going to give us some more of those, then great. I hope it's not too many, because if we start seeing like 3 kick return touchdowns a game, that might cause some concern, because there's certainly going to be some more talented kick returners in the NFL than there are in the XFL. Hopefully more talented coverage teams as well, so maybe it'll balance out. But, I shudder to think what a guy like Keyshawn Nixon is going to do with a rule like this on the Packers. Like, this dude, it might be putting up some prime Devin Hester numbers if it goes the way the NFL wants it to. Look, all of this to say, this is absolutely going to increase scoring for sure. And one note I did want to mention as well with this is, as you might imagine, this rule of, coverage team and receiving team lining up in different places might make onside kicks a little tricky. Surprise onside kicks are banned. So those will never happen again. Teams are required, if they are going to attempt an onside kick, to inform the officials beforehand. I think there's going to be a segment of people out there that are definitely going to overreact to that, because they are, kind of obsessing over the Sean Payton onside kick, the iconic one that happened years and years and years ago.
But phasing onside kicks out for years.
Onside kicks don't happen. So if anybody's upset about that, I would say just take a step back, realize that onside kicks barely happen, let alone surprise onside kicks. You might see one every 2 seasons.
They've stacked it so hard where you can only put a certain number of guys on each side of the kicker. Like, they've made it so recovering an onside kick is next to impossible. I'm personally the fan of, give a team a 4th and 25. You got one shot to make it 25 yards. If you do it, you get to keep the ball. Like, I think that would be a far more entertaining. I agree. Far more entertaining thing. Just as difficult, I'd argue, than recovering an onside kick. But like, yeah, there's just no point. And like, you take away. It's so funny at the end of these games. They're like, oh, if they score a quick touchdown here to get the onside kick, and you're just like, they're not getting the onside kick.
Yeah.
Like, as cool as it is, like, and then what was it, the Packers Seahawks, that NFC Championship game, God, 2015, I want to say, like, the electric Brandon Boss that doink off his head, like,
man. Yeah.
Like those, like, onside kicks have produced some great moments, but for whatever reason, again, maybe the league thinks it's dangerous, whatever, they just don't care for it, and this is basically, I wouldn't even say the nail in the coffin. The nail's been in the coffin. Now they're just being more upfront with it.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned that 4th and 25 rule, Pat. I believe that was actually proposed in this round of rule changes. Obviously, did not get passed. It was, I think they proposed it as a 4th and 20 though. And yeah, the fact that that rule has been kind of floated out there for a while tells me that we might have a chance of seeing that in a year, 2, 3 years. We'll see. Because I agree.
Diddle diddle, Ray Rice up the middle. Oh wait, we shouldn't be talking about Ray Rice at all.
Yeah, cancelable. Pat, if we ever see a screen pass or a halfback draw on one of those 4th and 20 plays,
Arthur Smith, baby.
Low key, the halfback draw might be smart. Like the first time ever that it's attempted, because you're gonna have 6 DBs out there to cover the 4th and 12. Like I don't know. If you don't get it, you look like the biggest idiot in the world. But if you do, that is big balls.
Well, like Andy Dalton or whoever was on the Giants did like the QB sneak from their own 8 on 3rd down. He just did like a QB dive.
I remember that. It was not Andy Dalton.
No, it wasn't. It was somebody bad though.
It was someone.
Mike Glennon. Mike Glennon.
I want to say this was the Jets. Was it Mike?
No, I know it was the Giants because it was Joe Judge. Like this was like the last.
Okay.
This was the last of it for.
Hold on,
Mike Glennon. QB draw.
I don't think it was Mike Glennon. No, because Mike Glennon, he wouldn't run a QB draw.
Well, that's what I mean. Like this was so ridiculous. The whole thing was so ridiculous. It might not have been Mike Glennon, but
QB.
Mike Glennon. I think it was 2021. He was on the Giants.
Was it really? Hold on.
I think so.
The Giants run a QB sneak on 3rd and 9. I found the Reddit page. Pardon our slight interruption here. Let me pull up the clip here because it's worth it. Let's see. Who are you? I can't see. It's number 17, maybe? Oh, my God. Hold on. Can the Reddit comments tell me who this is? Fuck. It's going to drive me nuts.
I am very confident it's Mike Glennon. But not that matters, but
it matters so much. Whatever. That was a hilarious play call when that happened.
Joe Judge. Give Joe Judge the clipboard back, baby. Let him cook.
Anyway, off track. We'll see if that new 4th down rule ever ends up happening. Instead of the onside kick rule, of course. Pat, continuing on the rule changes path here, the NFL is also expanding replay review, which is, in this case, I think a good thing. They're expanding it to roughing the passer and intentional grounding, but it is only for the objective things you can review with those plays. So in terms of roughing the passer, they can review, did they actually hit the quarterback in the head? For intentional grounding, they can review, was the quarterback actually in or out of the pocket? I think this is a great change.
Fantastic.
People hate the idea of slowing games down, really, in any sport. But to me, if you can get a play like this right, it is well worth it.
What would you rather like? And I feel like so many of the botched roughing the passer calls are hits to the head, or guys that kind of get hit in the upper body. It makes it look like they get hit in the head. Whatever. I feel like that is one of the bigger points of contention. So I think that's a slam dunk. I mean, the other thing is like I wish it could be something like. Because I think the other big one with roughing the passer is the body weight on the quarterback. And so they say is like putting their weight on the quarterback, and it's like, that is technically not objective. It's close, but it's not. Yeah. It would be great if they could do that, but I understand, again, you don't want to go to replay unless something is cut and dry, but I think this is going to definitely save some missed calls, and I would much rather stop the game and do that than just have some of these downright embarrassing roughing the passer calls. And I feel like, honestly, the officials are pretty good with intentional grounding. I feel like more, if anything, they don't get called when they should, more so than it getting excessively called. So, again, this is, just another good thing. Enforce, you got rules that intentional intentional grounding rule is a good rule. Make sure you get it right.
Yeah, the NFL with, mostly positive changes, even though the hip drop tackle thing is going to take all the headlines and just be the worst thing in the world, which I mean, it might be, hey, but some of these other things, at least we've got some good things going as well on the rule change track here. But also the trade deadline is getting pushed back a week. This is just a kind of a minor thing. It is now going to be after week 9 instead of after week 8. So the trade deadline pushed back by 1 week. And one other rule note is that the NFL is not banning the tush push. I think we kind of expected this. The momentum was kind of going away from this as the end of the season went along. I think probably because the Eagles didn't win the Super Bowl or get even close. So yeah, momentum definitely shifted away from banning the tush push. The NFL, I believe, described it as, the Eagles, they do it well. And I'm sure the NFL, the competition committee, and the rules committee, whoever, they're very interested to see how the Eagles run this next year without Jason Kelce and to see whether it is remotely as effective as it was with Jason Kelce, because he was the centerpiece of this play.
Get ready to learn pushing Jalen Hurts' ass, buddy.
Saquon, get your hands toasty, pal.
Like, the tush push, I just think, again, a lot of teams are mad just because the Eagles ran it so well. Like, they ran it so well. You know, again, if the Eagles sucked at it, this wouldn't be a conversation. A team just gamed a play, and teams tried. You saw lots of teams trying to do it. It just didn't work, you know? Maybe it won't work with Jason Kelce, and maybe this will be, you know... remember the Wildcat? Like, remember the Wildcat in, like, 2008? Like, all this talk was a Wildcat. Baby. Then you realize that Ronnie Brown and Ricky Williams were really the only guys that could do it. And you never saw it again. Like, you rarely saw the Wildcat. So maybe the tush push will kind of just be a passing fad.
I mean, to me, Pat, it was obvious the whole season because of what you just said. No other team was running it successfully. If a play is unfair, then that means everyone should be able to run it and game it and you know, be cheeky about it. And they couldn't. Like, other teams tried to run this and were drastically less successful. So, yeah, don't penalize a team for having the personnel and the ability to run a certain play. It would be like, I don't know. It would be like taking away whatever play Travis Kelce does the best just because Travis Kelce knows how to do it. The find the open space within 10 yards play that he fucking runs every down. Yeah, it was a little silly to me to even suggest that it would get banned. And I suspect, if I had to guess, that it will probably be a little less successful this year without Jason Kelce. Anyway, okay, moving on to some moves and just some little headlines from throughout the league, non-rule change related. So this was the big one, Pat. L'Jarius Sneed traded to the Titans. The Chiefs will receive a 2025 third-round pick, and these teams will also go through or engage in a 2024 seventh-round pick swap. So, initial reaction was, across the league, or across fans at least, that the Chiefs didn't get very much for L'Jarius Sneed, and I think that's probably true outside of just that part of it. My reaction to this, what are the Titans doing? The Titans
are a team that believe in Will Levis.
Oh my!
The Titans are a team that believes in Will Levis.
They sure do. They are a team that this is now 2 straight years of the Titans baffling me with either their strategy or lack thereof. Because last year I criticized them for not picking a direction between competing and tanking, so they just ended up in that middle ground, which is where they ended up. And now they are committing to a direction, and it's not the one I thought it would be. They are committing to trying to build a real contender around Will Levis. And to me, it's just a risky proposition, Pat. Like, I understand, I guess. It took me a second to reflect on this because in my mind, Will Levis was a guy who, as a second-round pick, was like, hopefully this guy works out, but if he doesn't, we'll live kind of thing. Then I realized, okay, actually, I mean, he was the 33rd overall pick. He was effectively a first-round pick. He was selected, when you think about it, right around where Lamar Jackson was selected when Lamar got drafted, that sort of in the 30s area, early 30s. And, yeah, I guess they have to kind of go for it with him. I didn't see or maybe didn't pay attention enough to Will Levis last year to where I was like, okay, yeah, they're going to go all in with Will Levis. They're going to try to maximize a championship window right now, but that's what they're doing. Like, they signed Calvin Ridley to a massive 4-year deal. They bring in Tony Pollard to have a very solid run game, and now they're trying to juice up a defense with one of the best corners in the league last year. It was very surprising to me, and I don't think it's going to work out. I'll put it that way. I don't know how you feel about it.
I think they're going to be mid. I just think they're going to be... I think they just scream 8 or 9 wins. I mean, maybe Will Levis will surprise us. Again, I think Brian Callahan is a huge upgrade over Tim Kelly in terms of play calling. And I mean, even Arthur Smith, because all Arthur Smith did was give large man ball and he'll run. So now, like, there's room for a more dynamic offense than we've seen. I think people are also kind of like pigeonholing themselves in the fact that this offense, even when it was good, was boring. Ryan Tannehill wasn't slinging the ball, and it was just mostly Derrick Henry, but that's completely different now. You've got Calvin Ridley, you've got Tony Pollard, you've got Tajay Spears. Our boy Chiga Conquo, don't forget one of our early podcasts. Speaking of folk heroes, he might be this podcast's greatest. He needs to be the second guest. But again, they're trying to. I think we're just so kind of trained to feel this way about the Titans. But that said, Yeah, it just screams mid. Like I can see Will Levis having a solid year. I can see Will Levis being Ryan Tannehill, but they don't have Derrick Henry to be the quarterback of the offense. So to speak.
And to me, that's the most confusing part. Is if they were going to try to build a contender, why was it such a foregone conclusion that they were going to let Derrick Henry go? I figured Derrick Henry leaving was a sign of, we are not going to build maybe the most competitive roster this year. And look, you can toe the line between giving Levis enough weapons that you can, see what you have in him and evaluate him this year and then see if you want to commit to him. That's what I thought they were going to do. I didn't think they were going to go full on, we're going to spend all our money, even on the defense. Like, I figured the Calvin Ridley one was one. Calvin Ridley and Pollard, I could sit there and be like, this is a little weird, but all right, give Levis the weapons, see what he's got. Pollard's on, I don't think Pollard's on a very long deal. He's a running back. He can't be on a very long deal. So it's like, you got to win.
3.
Was it really?
I could be wrong. Keep talking. I'll look.
Either way, you've got this. You would have this theoretical window of time, at least for this year,
3
to see
years.
what you've got. 3 years, okay, and see what you've got in Will Levis, and then decide. I figured they would take at least this season to decide on what they believed in Will Levis, or whether they believed in Will Levis or not, and then go all in, which I still think is the better move, Pat, because this free agent class wasn't that great. Like, if you're gonna go all in on a free agent class, and I don't know what next year's is shaping up to be, I honestly haven't looked at it, but this felt like weird timing, a weird class, and just weird overall.
But they went and traded.
For the
they
Titans.
Used it as a trade. I mean, they got their best player in a trade, and then Calvin Ridley was one of the better wide receivers in an admittedly weak group, weak after the franchise tag, basically. But yeah, I think they're doing all they can with the cap they have, and we saw Jacksonville struggle last year. Jacksonville did everything in their power to give away that division. And I think they know they have to compete in it with Jacksonville, and now Houston on the rise. Indianapolis is likely on the rise. They know they've got to throw shit at the wall here, and it's clear they had plenty of opportunities to get a better quarterback, or what they perceive to be a quarterback than Will Levis, and you didn't even hear about it. That was not even a consideration. So they clearly believe in him. Does everyone else? No, but I could see it happening. Xavier High School in Middletown, Connecticut, by the way. Will Levis, shout out.
This is true. Connecticut native Will Levis. Yeah, it is just a matter of the Titans obviously believe in Will Levis a lot more than other people do. Not necessarily even us. Just like Will Levis has no buzz, Pat. I haven't seen anybody talking about Will Levis is going to take this big second year. Nobody's talking about this guy. So maybe he is going to take a big step forward. The Titans certainly
saw him sling it that first game where he just magically dropped the ball in DeAndre Hopkins' hands 3 times 40 yards down the field. And everyone thought, this is going to be electric. And then I remember I started him that next game on Thursday night against the Steelers, and he was awful. That game was just awful. But we've seen that Will Levis can sling it. So if Brian Callahan is going to allow him to do that, and you've got some, like we talked about, decent weapons, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility at all. But again, screams 9 wins to me.
Yeah, it was just a little surprising to see them go all in like this, and there's certainly going to be a lot of, even if he's not feeling it, a lot of pressure on Will Levis, and a lot is going to hinge on him being good or not, because otherwise the Titans are going to be all sorts of thrown off in terms of their trajectory and playoff hopes, championship hopes, whatever you want to call it, because they're essentially locked into this little mini core of players now for at least 2 or 3 years. And if you are going to be struggling to find a quarterback that whole time, that's trouble. So their hope obviously is that they're not going to be struggling to find the quarterback, and that Will Levis, taken 33rd overall, second round in last year's draft, is going to be their guy. We'll just have to wait and see if he is. Keeping on the quarterback train, Pat, we talked about the Russell Wilson, Justin Fields situation last week. Mike Tomlin has clarified a comment, and this certainly makes a lot more sense on that situation. So he originally said that Russell Wilson was going to be given the pole position, that he was effectively the starter right now, and Justin Fields is going to be the backup, and that's how things are going to start. Tomlin clarified and said, when it's time to compete, Justin will be given an opportunity to compete. But I thought it was appropriate to describe it in a way for when we get started that Russell's in pole position, and I think his body of work justifies that. So definitely a much more neutral way of describing their quarterback situation, which is essentially just, if I have to give you a depth chart right now, Russell Wilson's on top of it, but to me, Pat, this sounds like as soon as camp opens, all bets are off, and this is really just a seniority type of thing, which is how it should have been.
It definitely makes it seem like this is more of a competition as opposed to it was like, hey, Russ is the starter. And like I thought last week where I said that there was no way that they didn't say, hey, Russ, you're the starter. Like, why would he have signed there when there were probably other places where he could have also easily been the starter? So you've got to think he's at least got the upper leg, which is exactly what it seems, but I think Justin Fields is probably a more impactful player at this point than Russell Wilson.
Yeah, I would agree. And we talked about, when we would expect to see Justin Fields take the field at the latest, and we basically said, after maybe a month of the season. I think it's probably going to be earlier than that at this way. I would
direct snaps to Cordero.
Oh God, no! I would be a little surprised. Honestly, if Justin Fields doesn't win this coming out of camp, if they truly go into camp,
surprise me either. No.
If they truly go into camp and say, nobody, like, this is an open competition, we are going to be completely open-minded about who is going to be our starting quarterback. I would expect Justin Fields to end up winning that based on what Russell Wilson has shown the last couple seasons and the upside that Justin Fields could have. Also, another quarterback piece of news here, Pat. Mike Macdonald says he doesn't expect a quarterback competition with the Seahawks. So there was some little rumblings that when the Seahawks traded for Sam Howell, this actually came from Adam Schefter, that he would be able to compete with Geno Smith for the starting job. So this from Mike Macdonald per Tom Pelissero. Mike McDonald saying, I don't think there will be a competition. I don't think there will be a competition. I've talked to Geno about it. Very confident in Geno. Geno's going to be our starter. Sam knows he's going to be our backup, but Sam is a great young player, and he's got a really bright future that we believe in. So, again, kind of back to what we expected to be status quo, even though Geno didn't have the best year last year. He's going to be the starter. Howell's going to be the backup.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, right on. We did see a little bit of regression from Geno, and again, we've really only seen him have one productive year in a very long NFL career, but thankfully it's happened recently. But again, I don't think it's a terrible play to have Sam. I don't think it's a bad play at all to have Sam Howell waiting in the wings. I'm not out completely on Sam Howell. We kind of what people call him White Jameis. Like we saw that this is a guy that is not afraid to take a big shot, and when the play clicks, it's great. When it doesn't, it looks horrible. So we've seen him not be afraid to do that. And who's to say that, if Geno does kind of fade this year or next year, I think Sam Howell could step in and possibly be their quarterback for the next handful of years. I don't just kind of see this as the sitting backup. Like, this could be a case where they could still believe in this kid and he could potentially be something in Seattle. I don't think it'll be this year, but...
Yeah, well, I mean, what the Seahawks traded for Sam Howell indicates they at least see a world where he could be their quarterback, or at least they value him as a very high-level backup because, again, they moved down essentially 30 spots in 2 different rounds of the draft. Like, that's not nothing when you think of compensation for a backup quarterback. So this is obviously a guy that they are looking for something from. It just doesn't sound like he's going to be the starter right away, or maybe even at all during the season. Yeah. He is much younger than Geno Smith. Let us not forget that either. Geno Smith is, sometimes people may forget how old. I don't know exactly how old he is off the top of my head, but he's certainly he's into his 30s at this point.
He's going to be like 33,
third year in
33,
the league.
Man, I'm good.
Damn, look at you, the age master. Sam Howell entering his third year in the league this year? Second? Third?
Yes.
One of those. Third year, I think.
Yes, it is third.
So, definitely a much younger option to have on the roster, which I do not think is a bad thing. And then one more piece of quarterback news. This one makes me chuckle. Brian Daboll says there's no guarantee that Daniel Jones is ready for week 1, but when he gets back, he'll be the guy. So, Brian Daboll firmly putting his stake in Daniel Jones after some rumblings that Drew Lock could compete for the starting job. At least for right now, Daboll is saying that that is not going to be the case. Good luck, Giants,
and that's a man that knows a good steak,
fans.
Too. When he puts his steak somewhere.
He does know a good steak. That is true. Good luck, Giants fans.
Again, just a lot of I can't wait for all of this stuff to start to get thrown around. We haven't even had the draft yet, let alone OTAs, let alone training camps.
Going to get a lot more complicated when J.J. McCarthy's in a Giants jersey in a month.
Oh, dear.
But
again, of course, at this point, he kind of has to say that. This is their, $160 million, whatever the fuck they paid this guy. They would just look bad if they kind of already abandoned it. They're at least going to try it with Daniel Jones. Whether that's the right decision or not, I don't know, but you think at least they have to try.
There are some teams, Pat, with quarterbacks that I'm just like, going into this upcoming season, I'm like, you guys got to know that what you got is damaged goods, right? Like, you got to know that the guy you're trotting out there is not it. And I think
there's want to be a Giants fan right now.
There's a couple quarterbacks that come to mind in that category, and it's Daniel Jones, it's Derek Carr, and I think it might be Deshaun Watson as well, where none of those teams can really feel good about their quarterback, but also all of those teams know there's effectively no chance that anyone different is starting for them under center come week 1. Also, just to kind of tie in all these names, shout out to Mike Tannenbaum, who floated a like Deshaun Watson for Daniel Jones trade. A, who wins that? B, stop talking when you're a former GM. There's a reason you're former. Stop doing this.
He had a good
it's
graphic
ridiculous
today where he compared J.J. McCarthy to like Kirk Cousins and Kyler, like saying like, oh, if the Cardinals were smart, and it said missed games 0. Motherfucker has played 0 NFL games.
I've been seeing Mike Tannenbaum fire off takes for far too long now, and when it's like, buddy, you have former next to GM in your title for a reason, and you've had it for years.
He's the new Bill Polian, except Bill Polian was at least successul at one point before he started consistently spewing garbage takes.
Oh, man.
Hello, Mike Mayock.
The guy just does not know what he's talking about. Yeah, I remember seeing that when I was researching for this segment. I was looking at Deshaun Watson stats, and there was just a little video to the side. It was like, oh, proposed Deshaun Watson for Jones and like picks or something to that effect. I was like, shut the fuck up. Stop talking. Okay. Pat, that'll essentially do it for our NFL news as we reach, the slower time.
Ready for the UConn Slurp Fest, baby.
So let's move in to the college basketball March Madness portion of our show. Also, guys, we will finish out with viewer questions that will have some NFL things. So we'll get back to a little football at the end. But for now, this is the March Madness segment. Pat, we talked about the tournament being a little bit chalk, and look, it has been. I don't think it's been a terrible tournament. Honestly, the only people that are like truly devastated about it being chalk are just the most casual fans of all time that only want the upsets. I think we still got a little bit of them, starting with Golke Mania. Jack Golke. I mean, first of all,
that man has about as good of a hairline as I do.
It is, yeah, same. Jack Golke, first of all, I want to say, I picked Oakland. I was the only one in our personal about 28, 29 person bracket pool that picked Oakland. But full disclosure, my Oakland pick was strictly a Kentucky hate pick because
you got it right.
I know.
You nailed it.
I know. I had seen a stat that was like no, and Alabama actually bucked this trend now, but it was that no team entering the tournament as top 10 in KenPom offense, but outside the top 100 in KenPom defense, none of those teams had ever reached the Sweet 16. And those teams that qualified for that this year were Kentucky and Alabama. So I figured, let me get Kentucky out in the first round,
dude.
And then I said let's get Bama out. I think I had them losing to Grand Canyon in the second round. That obviously didn't happen. But the Kentucky pick, yeah, only one in our pool to pick Oakland. So shout out to me for that. But I did not know Jack Golke was a person until that game, and
I don't think they did.
I don't think anyone did. And Pat, I don't think I've seen a player more perfectly personify March Madness than Jack Golke. I mean, that game and his performance and the way he plays is exactly.
The man did not take a 2.
No, he barely took a 2 all year.
10 of 20. What is he? 10 of 20 from 3 in that game. That's off the bench.
Something like that.
That's off the bench. Oh, he said it. He said it.
Oh, he said the thing.
But that was electric, and just all the memes where it's like Kentucky has 2 top 10 picks. Rob Dillingham and Reed Shepard are both going to be top 10 picks. Rob Dillingham might be like a top 3 pick. And they got cooked by a dude who's going to be working for State Farm in a few months. To the point where now they started singing the jingle. Some Oakland players and staff saw the tweet. So they started singing the State Farm jingle to Jack Golke. Is it Jack? What did I? Am I losing my? I want to call him Brandon. What the fuck is wrong with me?
Not Brandon Golke.
Sorry, Brandon on the brain right now, but Jack Golke. And then he got a fucking NIL deal the night of the game.
He got multiple NIL
He was
deals.
doing a TurboTax commercial in the ballroom of the hotel that they were staying in. That is beautiful. That is like, that perfectly personifies like not only how insane March Madness is and these names that could come from it, but also where we're at in terms of NIL. And it was just the perfect personification of that. I loved it. And he's not even the best player on that team.
No, he may not even be a top 2 best player on that team, at least not during the course of the regular season. He doesn't start. He doesn't start, except in these tournament games. He still didn't start. It was just that when he came in, he didn't come out of the game. But throughout the course of the year,
sometimes being a starter doesn't mean much.
No, certainly not. But yeah, their best player is Trey Townsend, who I believe was what league are they? The Horizon League Player of the Year, I think. Yes. Yeah. So he was Horizon League Player of the Year, and you could tell throughout the course of the game, actually, if you watched the whole game, that he was their best player. He was a rock, and he was a massive, massive difference maker in both of Oakland's games. But yeah, throughout the course of the year, like Golke wasn't necessarily one of their best players, and yet. No. What he has always been is an elite 3-point shooter from a percentage standpoint, just not necessarily from a volume standpoint. And he said, we're up in the volume in this tourney, and we're going to knock off Kentucky because of it. That's fortunately fell short to NC State. But, hey, NC State's fun in their own right.
NC State's fun in itself. I mean, DJ Burns is probably the number 2 superstar of this tournament behind Jack Golke.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
What's the meme where it's just like the huge guy hooping where he'll just like throw a pass over his head and just point at the camera and just free? Like, that's basically DJ Burns. That man is a ton of fun.
Yeah, so look, even though we didn't get a lot of upsets in volume in this tourney, we definitely got one in terms of quality with Oakland over Kentucky, because that is the most picture-perfect sort of March Madness personified game you could really ever do.
And I saw there's a contingent of Kentucky fans on Twitter that think they should go and get Dan Hurley as their next head coach. Good luck with that. Good fucking luck with that, pal.
I don't understand the lot. Look, I understand that Kentucky fans are pompous and they think everything revolves around them, and so they think that obviously they're an upgrade over little old UConn in our Big East and whatever. Dan Hurley, realistically, what he would have to do if he went to Kentucky is rebuild that program. Like, yes, you have the clout to still bring in some recruits probably, but Calipari's built a culture that is so opposite from what Dan Hurley wants that he is not going to put in that effort. He's not going to move his family to Kentucky just to start from ground zero when he is on the cusp, knock on wood, of winning back-to-back national championships at one of the biggest college basketball brands in the world. Shut the fuck up, Kentucky fans. It's not happening.
I truly believe Dan Hurley is going to be like Jim Calhoun, and I think he is going to be at UConn for a very long time, as long as he is coaching, as, you know, local ties to the area, not immediate, but you know what I mean, quick success. And I mean, he's building his name and his legacy there. So Kentucky fans, that's very cute. I don't know if you can John Calipari, like, who do you get that's better? But at the same time, like, Cal has proven time and time again, when push comes to shove in these NCAA tournament games, that team disappears. They cannot win NCAA tournament games. To lose to they lost to St. Peter's last year in the first round, right? Yeah, to lose to St. Peter's and Oakland is a 2 and a 3 seed. That's embarrassing, man. Like, that is not a good look. But at the same time, it's just, I don't know. No, they are not getting Jawan Howard. God.
St. Peter's was 2 years ago, by the way. Last year, they made the second round, barely beating Providence, and then lost to number 3 seed Kansas State. But yes, they lost to St. Peter's 2 years ago. St. Peter's was 2 years ago, indeed.
Really? Oh, you're right. That's right. That's right.
Yep. So, look, Kentucky has a history of losing these games. You're right. And I mean, look, I don't know who they get. In theory, they would have the pick of the litter from a bunch of, you know, these successful mid-majors if they wanted to go that route. But
they'd
a lot of them have moved.
Some high majors too.
They certainly would. But a lot of those coaches have moved, Pat. I got it down here for some of the movement. We've already seen Dusty May going from Florida Atlantic to Michigan. And he had just signed like a massively long deal at FAU, didn't he? Like last year after their tourney run. And then now it turns out he's just dipping, going to Michigan. Danny Sprinkle going from Utah State to Washington. Kyle Smith from Washington State to Stanford. And Darian DeVries, our boy, going from Drake to West Virginia and bringing his son Tucker with him. I was shocked that Tucker DeVries had eligibility left, but
and then Mark Byington from James Madison is head of the Vanderbilt. So like, it seems like every year these upset teams. I'm surprised Will Wade has kind of been left in the dust a bit, except the fact that he's probably a complete slime ball. Besides that fact, but And I guess to kind of jump in, to segue Will Wade and Darren DeVries, those teams let everybody down. Drake and McNeese. I never thought for a second. McNeese was one of those teams where it's like, almost like Drake last year, like I wanted to pick them. And then the second I saw Gonzaga, I was just like, nope. Like, it was one of those things where I never gave...
McNeese to me was the Oral Roberts from a year or two, whenever that was.
Well, they had
5 seed,
Asmus,
12 seed Oral Roberts was facing 5 seed Duke. I can't remember if this was that last year or the year before, but
I believe it was two.
I think it was 2 years ago as well, because Asmus was still there, and Asmus has been on Texas for the past 2 years. So yes, 2 years ago that was the matchup, and I remember still picking Oral Roberts when realistically I knew I shouldn't. It was just because I liked them so much before the bracket came out. So I did use that at least to educate myself this year and learn from my mistakes. Because yeah, McNeese State was kind of the same thing. I was like, I really like this team, but then the draw was just so bad. I was like, nah, I'm gonna pick Gonzaga to hold on here, and they certainly came through there. There weren't a lot of upsets, and Drake let me down even more so, Pat. I honestly, the Drake game is gonna make me not believe in West Virginia next year should they find themselves in the tourney field, but B, just surprised me so much because down the stretch of that game, the whole reason I liked Drake was because Tucker DeVries is a great player. I've seen him play. I've watched a lot of Missouri Valley games, or I've at least watched Missouri Valley Conference Tournament games for the past 2 years. I'm like, this dude can ball. He's got the numbers, he's got everything. He did not even attempt to take over that game at the end, take a big shot. And it wasn't like he was being face guarded to hell and like completely taken out of the equation. He had opportunities to try and make a difference there, and it just didn't happen. I don't know if it was a coaching choice, a just kind of collapsing under the bright lights situation, but man, that man let me down, and I am not going to be fooled again by Tucker DeVries should he find himself in the NCAA tournament next year.
I think you and I both had Drake. Did you have Drake in your Sweet 16? Because I did. And I also had New Mexico. I mean, you had New Mexico in the fucking Final Four. That was a little unhinged on your part. I had him in the Sweet 16. I had him in the Sweet 16. I think that's more of an indictment of Clemson. Took a lot of shit after Selection Sunday. Like, oh my God, Clemson should have been on the bubble, let alone a 6 seed. Well, Brad Brownwell and crew just went out there and have stomped on the necks of God, I'm blank. Well, obviously New Mexico and then Baylor. Yeah, Baylor. That's right. Who I thought New Mexico would beat. So I didn't have Baylor going far, but I think that's just more of an indictment of good for Clemson. Good for Clemson for kind of, facing the criticism and showing like, no, we belong here and we are now in the Sweet 16.
In my research for brackets, I was contemplating or conversing with my buddy Gary and talking about how there's always that one icky team that goes to the Sweet 16 out of nowhere. And I was like, I'm desperately trying to identify it. I'm desperately trying to, but I'm like, this is probably a futile effort to try and find it. Cause like the icky teams are icky for a reason. It's because they give you going in zero reason to believe that they should do anything. And if they were to do anything, it would be because they completely flipped the switch out of nowhere. And that's what Clemson did. And I guess, Pat, now that I'm hearing you talk about it, I guess that is the only thing to look for, is a team that could theoretically feel disrespected. And maybe that's what drives them. But it's like Clemson, talent-wise, success-wise, record-wise, had nothing to latch onto for you to believe that they were going to do anything in this tournament.
And were yet just here they are. Team that was there. And those feel like the teams that I just remember vividly, like years ago, UMass got like a 6 seed. And then Iowa pumped them out of the play-in game. And it was just like, how the fuck were they? Like, it almost felt like that was going to be Clemson this year. Like every year, like you said, there's a really underwhelming 6 or 7 seed where it's just like, ew. But again, hey, they also have an assistant coach named Dick Bender. I mean, how do you not get behind Dick Bender?
If I had known that, I would have put him in the national championship game. God damn it.
UConn, Clemson, Final Four. But I kind of called my shot a little bit last week and then kind of hit the brakes. I said last week that Yale would win. If only I had followed through with that on all of my brackets.
Oof.
I pulled them in at least our personal bracket. I pulled Yale. And but in others I kept Yale. And it's a case where every year there's a region where I pick wrong. And I had Yale and San Diego State, and I'm like, this is going to be it. it's going to be UAB and Auburn. So some of them I flipped it. And man, but I mean, I called the shot here. It says it in, we have it on record here that I had Yale to an extent. I also had Duquesne. Duquesne, like, I was feeling great after the first game, man. I had Mississippi State, so I wasn't feeling good after the first game. But after Duquesne won that game, I'm like, man, I bet a lot of people are 0-2, and it is not me.
Duquesne was another one where it's like they, to me, were like the mid-major version of Clemson, where it's like, what is there to like about this team? I felt so confident
Their
in
coach
picking.
is retiring.
I know, I knew that story actually going in, but I felt so confident in BYU because I was like, Duquesne was the 6th best team in the A10.
That was totally.
They fell ass backwards into the tourney. Like
the committee made a slot for VCU. And they said, okay, whoever wins the A10 championship game is getting the 11th seed, when that was just ridiculous. Like, if VCU won it, yeah, they're an 11th seed. But Duquesne was probably more of a 12, maybe even a 13. Like, the fact that they were an 11th seed when that happened, that was the first thing that I thought was just like the committee was just lazy and just had that spot penciled in for the A10 championship. But again, hey, but they've got the story. I mean, 1977, I believe, was the last time. I don't know if you follow the account Mid-Major Madness.
Oh, I sure do.
It's a great account. And Duquesne, that's a Duquesne family.
Really? So, like, I didn't know that. Okay.
Like I guess his grandfather like worked there or something like.
Okay.
These fans, some of them for their lifetime who have never seen success, were spoiled as shit. I can recall vividly 4 UConn championships. We are spoiled as shit. But, like, for some of these teams, just making the tournament, let alone winning a game, is just such a big deal. Like, when Central does break through, and it's going to happen under Pat Sellers, it will happen, that is going to just be, like, I can't even, like, fathom the elation that I'm going to feel when that happens. So, like, to see it for fans of these schools, just good for you guys. Good for you.
Yeah, it was very surprising. That was, to me, surprising. It was at least one of those games that I was like, there are some games I have regrets about, like, oh, I should have picked this way, that way. I never had any doubts I was not going to pick fucking Duquesne. And yet, here they are. They won a game. Good for them.
All right, now you rant about Zach Edey while I don't piss myself.
Okay, Pat's got to go on one of our off-the-bench sponsored pee breaks. We do allow him to go to the bathroom occasionally. Yeah, look, just in terms of my overall bracket, I mean, this has kind of just been a summation of our best and worst picks. But I'm angry at Drake. I'm angry at New Mexico for not following through. I did also have Wisconsin in my Final Four, and that was kind of purely a gut pick because I was either going to pick a team like that or I was going to pick, like, Houston or Marquette, and my Final Four was already getting too chalk because we had 1 seed UConn, 2 seed Tennessee. I had picked 11 seed New Mexico, but I wanted to not have a third top 2 seed in my Final Four, and so I went with Wisconsin because I was like, Wisconsin, they were they were a top 10 team earlier in the year. I was like, hopefully they can just kind of find that magic. It did not happen. They lost to JMU. JMU then got pumped by Duke. The Samford upset was close, almost happened, probably should have happened if not for a botched call, although that was a very tough call to make.
And Nick Timberlake went to a UConn, that wouldn't have happened to him.
Pat.
But he's also ass. Thank God.
I thank everyone, everything, every day that Nick Timberlake did not come to UConn. I vividly recall looking up Nick Timberlake highlights when I heard that he was a potential UConn target or a major UConn target. It was
that or Kansas. It was his final,
just
one of his
Kansas
final
and UConn. So I remember looking up his highlights. I was like, man, this dude drains threes. He's awesome. And he picked
got
Kansas.
size.
Fuck you. And then we got Cam Spencer, who is just infinitely better than Nick Timberlake.
Oh, that was the Pat show.
Yeah, the Pat show. My camera just likes to die now. Whatever. Just such a better. And look, maybe Timberlake would have been better in the UConn system. I don't know, but either way, fuck him. Fuck that end of that game. That was very disappointing. But yeah, in terms of my bracket, Pat, really my calling cards at this point are just picking Oakland over Kentucky, having the Oakland-NC State matchup, and picking NC State to move on. I had that as well, so that feels good. But overall, my Final Four is a little bit cooked. So it's
my
not the
calling card right now is that I have my entire Elite Eight alive.
Wow, I did not realize that.
UConn, Illinois, Alabama, Arizona, I think, maybe. Yeah, because the Baylor's gone. So Arizona, Houston. Oh God, Marquette,
testing Pat's memory. Boomer boy.
Houston, Marquette,
Yep.
Gonzaga, and Creighton.
Wow. Okay. Very possible.
Either 11 or 12 of 16 for Sweet 16, depending on my Yale brackets, because the ones where I picked Auburn to win, I picked them to win again. Yeah, I guess, so that's the one thing about kind of going chalk is that if it works out like this, like my bracket has been shit. Like my first few rounds were not good. I think I went like 20 and 12 or like 21 and 13 or 19 and 13, something ugly. But if things go the way I am, I'm going to win several bracket pools if things can kind of keep going the way they do. Because when so many, like I'm in a pool at my job and like only 5 people, like not only 5 people, but like only 5 people's champions are gone. Like so many people took UConn. Is like you kind of have to get everything right around UConn to win, and that's what I've set myself up to do. But I guess now's the chance to sort of glaze UConn, which I think we all kind of knew was happening here. Obviously, I'm not going to say they're unstoppable, but they look very, very, very good. To see a game where they were horrendous from 3. They couldn't hit a 3 if their life depended on it. For them to dominate in that fashion against a good Northwestern team. Like I think Hurley said at halftime, he's like, you don't win 13 games in the Big Ten by accident. Like the Big Ten was
Northwestern
a solid
beat
conference.
Purdue.
That's what I mean. Like
Purdue.
Northwestern is a really solid team, and for them to go and dominate that, there was really never a point in that game where you thought UConn did not have it. And the difference between that game and the Stetson game was the second half against Stetson. They came out and looked like shit right off the jump in the second half. They looked flat. They looked nonchalant. They did not do that a second time. They kept that foot on the pedal, and they looked fantastic. I mean, I said, I've told people, I was telling my dad even before, this NCAA tournament it's not Donovan Klingen's, coming out party. It's going to be what gets him to be a top 10 pick in this draft. Mm-hmm. Like, this is where everyone is going to know who Donovan Klingen is. 14, and 8 blocks. Unbelievable. From Bristol, Connecticut. A kid from Bristol fucking Connecticut is going to be a top 10 pick in the NBA draft this year. Unbelievable. But that's what makes that team so good, is that they can beat you in so many ways. You could just go inside to Klingen. If you've got the size advantage, go to Klingen. But then you've got the games where it's a Cam Spencer game. Or, Al Caravan has struggled, admittedly, at least consistently. But, there are games where they're hitting threes. And Tristan Newton is just so goddamn good. Like, what he has brought to that team. I mean, if they win the championship, he needs to go up in the as a Husky of Honor in 2 seasons.
It's crazy.
It's he really has brought to that team. And it just goes to show that even the games where he's kind of faded, because everyone's like, oh, Tristan Newton's not on a first-team All-American. He only scored this. He didn't have to. No. He knew when to step back. He's a great rebounder for a point guard. He's a great passer. And he's just a leader. I mean, he's a 5th-year player. He is a leader. And that kid deserves absolutely to be a first-team All-American, because he is... It's amazing because, like, they say the glue guy can't be, like, the best player. But he's somehow the best player and the glue guy for this team, because they have so many other pieces. And Tristan Newton is just that perfect piece that fits in. Man, just watching that game, it's just like wild. And then, I didn't even mention Steph Castle, who's also going to be a lottery pick, who, again, similar to Newton, is just great without the ball in his hand. Can just impact the game in so many different ways. And he's only 18, 19 years old. Mm-hmm. He's got a lot of development to do. He needs jump shot, but again, we're not talking like Andre Jackson levels of no jump shot. Like, the kid can hit some threes, but I think he's going to be like an elite slasher, a great defender at the next level. And then Hassan Diarra, Big East 6 Man of the Year. Like, they have got, but that's the only problem. After those 6, I mean, Samson Johnson's good energy, but that's my only concern, is that if somebody gets hurt, they're in trouble. They're in big trouble.
But look, here's the thing. No team is that flush with good players. Like, UConn's depth beyond them, yes, you're looking at Jalen Stewart, Samson Johnson, and Solomon Ball.
Yep.
Those 3 guys would start for a lot of teams left in this tournament. I mean, Solomon
Ball started for a good amount of the year to start the year. Then he became a bench warmer.
I think we look at those 3 players as being, a tier or 2 below the top 6 players in our rotation, and that's absolutely the case. But that's still above and beyond what a lot of other teams are working with once you get 7 deep into their or 2 deep into their bench, 7 deep into their roster as well. So yeah, Pat, I really just find myself trying to, and this is good. This is the ultimate stroke fest. So sorry, guys. We're from Connecticut.
Oh, I don't give a shit, dude.
No,
I'm
doesn't
fucking
matter.
reveling in this.
I genuinely try to cherish every game I get to watch of this lineup because whether they finish the job or not, I don't think it's debatable anymore. This team is better than last year's team, and
this is the best team I've seen. I said 4 championships. This is the best UConn team I've seen.
Some folks may have their philosophies out there that it can't be better unless it wins the championship. Just hard disagree because there's a certain level of, randomness and chance that can affect games. So if they don't win it, that sucks. But this team is firmly the best UConn team I've ever watched. And when you hear analysts and commentators say that this team has no weaknesses, it's true. And normally that's hyperbole. Pat, it's true. There's no discernible weakness on this team.
Their biggest weakness is 3-point shooting potentially. They are very hot and cold.
I can't even call that a weakness.
It can be. At least I'll say
it can be. Anything can be. That's the nature of basketball.
But they're good enough to get past it.
Yeah, that's the nature of basketball.
Clear as day.
You have 3 players in your starting lineup that we are very comfortable with shooting a 3 from literally anywhere on the court. Like Cam Spencer, Alex Caravan, and Tristan Newton have an ultimate green light. Steph Castle can hit some, once in a while as well. And
Klingon's made 2 this year.
Yeah, true. They have no weakness. And as the crew on TNT or whatever network it was had to specify, that does not mean that they can't be beat. Because as we saw against Northwestern, if we're against a good team and we go 2 for 20 from 3, we're probably going to lose. But that's just the nature of basketball. Sometimes it's not your night. Yeah. But as far as an exploitable weakness, something you can game plan for, there isn't one.
No, exactly. You kind of just got to get lucky. And they had Kenny Smith, Charles Barkley, and Clark Kellogg had a really, really, I think we're talking about the same thing, a really interesting conversation on potentially what could happen. It's just funny because these halftime shows are really fluff, but I don't know, man. I've listened to some really good analysis here from some of these basketball talking heads about here. But I guess the other notable team to talk about is Purdue, who, granted, I didn't see a whole lot of Purdue this season. Obviously, Big Ten Network, a lot of games. What a system. They are slow, but they are smooth, and they get the job done. To seize it, Zach Edey will go and set as many high ball screens as he needs to find the open man before he can roll to the basket, but the guy's 7'4", and he is basically unstoppable, which is insane for a kid who, if he was 6'10", would be washing cars. Zach Edey is clearly not a pristine NBA talent. He'll get a shot. He'll probably be a first-round pick.
Yep.
But the skill set alone is not there. But he plays to his strengths and size. He's a phenomenal passer, either from at the top of the key on setting screens or from under the basket. He is a phenomenal passer. That man gets a whistle on every play.
Oh my God. My ears are still ringing from them. It's brutal.
I had them losing to Utah State. So in that first half, I'm uh-oh. And then they literally they didn't step on the necks, they snapped them. They snapped their necks in the second half.
What I want to say about that game though is Utah State did not come ready to play, at least not after the start of that game, because that game was
they had a shot.
To me, it was still winnable. You look at the score, they got blown the fuck out. They got blown out because if you watch that game, Pat, they panicked. I don't know why they panicked. They kept it close for a decent amount of time in the first half, and then they just got to a point where they were like, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to force everything. And then they did. And
had it close at the under 8 in the first half even.
Yeah, and that just ended up taking them out of the game when they just made horrific decisions. And look, here's what I'll say about Purdue. This is obviously an encouraging first 2 rounds for them and for their fans. They've exercised their demons because now if they lose from any point, from this point on, it's not that disappointing. Like, yes, you want them to finish the job, but now if they lose, they're not going to lose to a low seed. They're not going to lose to a bad team. They've reached that.
Their first one, yeah.
They've reached that checkpoint now where it's like if they lose, they're going to lose to a good team, and I think that's huge for exercising their demons out of this tournament. But I still haven't necessarily seen anything that tells me this team is a team I want to bet on to win the national. And that's, forget UConn. Take UConn out of this universe for a second. Even if the field was everybody except UConn, and we're just looking at Houston, North Carolina, Arizona, I still don't view Purdue as this like above the rest of the pack or most of the rest of the pack type of team. And if they beat Gonzaga, maybe I'll feel differently. I'm not even sure if I will, but if they reach the Final Four,
Gonzaga's got good interior defense.
Yeah, it's going to be a good matchup.
Defender down there.
The spread on that game right now is Purdue minus 5.5. So that'll definitely be a good game. Purdue should have most of the home court there. That game's in Detroit, Michigan, certainly much closer to Indiana than it is to wherever the fuck Gonzaga is in Washington. I don't know exactly
Spokane,
what city. Spokane, yeah. So, Purdue should have home court there. But, yeah, that's going to be a good game. Maybe I'm still just hating Pat. I hope this isn't a repeat of how I felt about the Chiefs when we were talking about it for the NFL, but I'm not fully sold yet. They've done their job up to this point. You're not getting a big pat on the back from me for beating 16 seed whoever the fuck and Utah State. Like,
after we just sucked off every individual that's ever played basketball for UConn, but
that is more of a course of the season sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yes, I do understand the hypocrisy. It is funny to say it that way.
But I would love to see those two teams square off. I don't think they will.
I would too. I would too. I think the Kling-Edey matchup is fascinating because that is not the same player. What I would hate to see if that were to transpire is just one of them get into early foul trouble, which I think there's a good chance to happen. Yeah, and that it would be Klingen. Mm-hmm. Because Klingen, for those that don't watch, both of these teams or either of these teams religiously, Klingen 7-2, Edey 7-4. Zach Edey makes Donovan Klingen look like Russell Westbrook from an athleticism perspective. Yeah. Donovan Klingen is very laterally quick. He is one of the best players at handling ball screens and just defense in general that you will find in the league. He is the exact opposite, at least defensively, of being just tall. Offensively, game has a little bit to be desired, but defensively and just quickness-wise, it is night and day. So I'd be very curious to see that matchup, hoping that fouls would not be a big part of the equation. But Pat, as we talk about the hypothetical for a UConn-Purdue national championship, what do you think is going to happen the rest of the way here before we get to our March Legends draft? Because we've got some games to pan out.
I've got to stick with my original bracket here, and I had UConn over Creighton in the finals. Creighton has not looked particularly convincing. They scared the hell out of me going to, double OT was it? Or at least overtime. And they scared the hell out of me, as did Marquette. Go Big East. But I've got to roll with it. And I had Alabama and Houston joining them. And again, Houston also very scary. Very scary. We've seen a lot of these top teams get scared. But just for the sake of that, I'm going to stick with it.
Yeah, so me, obviously, the only teams I have left in my Final Four are the two teams I have in my national championship game in my bracket, which are UConn and Tennessee. Shout out Rick Barnes for still being alive at this point. So I will stick to that pick for the national title game. As far as filling out the Final Four, I think I'm going to go with Houston. It's obviously a boring pick at this point, but them surviving that game against A&M and having all the foul trouble possible in that game, I think I'm convinced on them over Marquette at this point. I will morbidly, and maybe I would regret this, but I think I will be rooting for Marquette should that matchup come to pass, just to have more Big East teams in the Final Four. If it were to set up a Big East national championship game, that would make me greatly nervous, but also be great for the conference. So that
especially
would be fun.
Since we saw Creighton smoke UConn.
Yeah. So I'm going to go with Marquette I'm not going to go with Marquette. I'm going to go with Houston out of that region, although I wouldn't be upset to see Marquette. And then out of the other region, I think I'm going to go with Arizona. Them getting this far has convinced me a little bit that maybe they can win two more, and they're certainly going to be motivated to get to what would essentially be a home game in the Final Four, Pat. I am not... That's my, if I have to bet on it pick, I'm picking Arizona to get to the Final Four. But as a UConn fan, I am certainly not rooting for Arizona to get to the Final Four and have to play UConn in Phoenix. I'm all set on that one. It's reminiscent of last year when Houston was making a push for the Final Four, and it would have been in Houston. So yeah, hopefully Arizona gets bounced, and we'll go from there. But Pat, let's get into it here with about 15-ish minutes left in our podcast. We'll do our March Legends draft. Guys, we are going to be drafting players who just made their names in previous March Madnesses.
Players, keyword. Wink.
Yes, this is in honor of Jack Golke being just the prototypical March
Might get
Legend
picked
this year. Might get picked. He's on my board certainly. Pat, I think you have the first pick, or do I?
I thought it was you.
Do I have the first
remember
pick?
our
All right.
last one.
All right, I'll take the first pick then here. I'm gonna go with I'm gonna go with him. I'm going to go with Doug Eater here out of St. Peter's.
Yeah, recency bias.
Yeah, it's recency bias, but it's also, Pat, he won 2 games. Like, that's a big one to me. That St. Peter's team not only knocked off Kentucky, which was a massive upset, taking down a 2 seed, then they knocked off Purdue. Like, for a 15 seed to go on and win 2 games, you don't see it that often. He is one of the more memeable looking players, and I think he, as much as anybody, personifies March and personifies some of these upsets.
And then transferred to Bryant and barely played.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I kind of just wish he was still on St. Peter's and could have been there for their tourney appearance this year, but it was not to be.
All right, you know where I'm going here. I'd like to preface it for dramatic effect. This guy's definitely got the funniest name on the list here. This was, I believe, back in 2010. He hit a huge buzzer beater in the first round. From Northern Iowa, let's go with Ali Farouk-Manesh. Ali Farouk my bracket.
Ali Farouk my bracket. He's on a staff somewhere now, and I don't remember where.
Nebraska.
Nebraska. Okay.
Oh no,
yes,
he was. I'm sorry. He's at Colorado State now. He was at Drake.
That makes more sense because Colorado State. Yeah, I knew it was. I had looked at them because they were in the play-in. Ali Farouk-Manesh. I mean, one of my earlier March memories for sure. I mean, that tournament was 2010, I think that
yes,
they
it
upset
was.
Kansas. So, one of the first maybe 2 or 3 tournaments I ever watched. And yeah, just what a moment. Northern Iowa over Kansas. Never to be forgotten. Yeah. All right. With my second pick here, a few different ways I could go. I could continue with sort of recency bias, and I'm tempted to. I'm going to go with someone, Pat, and this may be the only true household name on here.
Oh,
but
no.
He wasn't really a household name until this happened. I'm going with CJ McCollum.
Oh, I thought you were going in a way different direction.
No, I'm going with CJ McCollum, led Lehigh to an upset over Duke. I believe it was 15-seeded Lehigh. And CJ McCollum
15 seeds won that year. Norfolk State beat Missouri.
I have him on my board. CJ McCollum was a very good player. He averaged about 20 points per game, but from his conference tournament on, basically was dropping 27, 28, 29, 30 points a night, and I believe had 30 against Duke to upset them. We all love a good Duke upset. And look, this guy, CJ McCollum, was a 3-star recruit coming out of high school. He was not by any means a slam dunk, gonna be in the NBA type of player. So a game like this and his overall college
never made
career.
An all-star team?
That surprises me and also doesn't. I don't know. I don't know why.
Because he's always good, but never. Jordan Montgomery signed with the Diamondbacks, by the way.
Oh, great. Also, my camera died again.
Oh, there goes Brandon again. Yeah, he's never made the All-Star game where he's always good, but he's never that good. I thought you were going in a different direction here. And
really?
I was wondering, this guy is, spoiler alert, he is one of the most household basketball names. But at this point in 2008, he was not. He led Davidson to the Elite Eight. Mr. Stephen Curry.
Okay, interesting. That, I think, Pat, that speaks to slightly different philosophies that we have on here, but I think you're probably accurate in that Steph Curry was not.
He was not a. I mean, and also, that was it had been 40 years since Davidson had won a tournament game, and they made back-to-back tournaments where they won games, and second time around made it to Elite Eight. The Elite Eight, and that's how Steph Curry even got to be the 7th pick. I don't know, top. To be picked in the top 10.
I think it was ninth. Yeah,
because of this run from Davidson, he's not obviously he's made a name for himself outside of March Madness, but that's where it all started. He might have had one of the best underdog runs in terms of statistics ever.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I had kind of written him off because I forgot that he had started from such unassuming origins. Because
that was when Davidson was in like the Big South too. Like that was before their A10 days.
In my preparation for this, I was like, am I gonna include a guy like Shabazz Napier? But probably not. I think he's a little overqualified from a body of work college perspective, where it's like, you know, he played at a major conference team and people somewhat knew who. Yes, leading a 7 seed to a national championship is a crazy feat. But I think this is more of the guys that popped up a little more out of nowhere, and I think Curry, at least that level of run, I think that qualifies. So I think that's fair. Okay, with my next pick, there's a few. Could I do I go with Golke? No, I don't think I'm going to. Pat, I'm going to go with a guy who, upon reviewing his numbers, wasn't even that great, but I think he was the symbolic leader of an 11 seed that reached the Final Four. I'm going with Cameron Krutwig.
Big Ugly!
Chicago.
He's on
Cameron Krutwig, I think, averaged like under 10 points a game during the course of that tournament. Clayton Custer was objectively the better player for that Loyola Chicago team, but in March, legends are not strictly made through the box score. They are also made through your appearance and just style of play. So,
and I just remember our friend, I was watching the games with our friend Dan that year, and he just goes, this guy's big and this guy's ugly. So I'm calling him Big Ugly. Mm-hmm. And this was when he was like a sophomore. So for the next 2 years, we just called this poor guy Big Ugly, who just had an insane Christmas rap album on his SoundCloud when we looked him up and just listened to it. And I remember like Dan tweeted at him and the kid liked the tweet. And this is when we were younger. I think we were, or we were in college as well.
We were in college, yeah. This is like 2018.
I had Big Ugly on my list, but
good.
I think I'm gonna go with a good friend of Big Ugly here. I'm gonna pick Sister Jean.
Oh my god.
Who is more of an icon?
Oh my god.
Because of March Madness than Sister Jean.
Okay. That was not what I
That's why I see when you went Krutwig, when you went with Krutwig, it kind of, I'm like, oh man, like shit, like my element of surprise is ruined, but I'm sticking with her, Sister Jean.
I need the committee to review. I need the committee to review Sister Jean's eligibility in this draft.
I've got a few more ridiculous picks coming, so get ready.
Fantastic. Mine are all players, so I'm sure you're gonna blow me out of the water with this.
Player adjacent as well.
Okay. Okay. All right. With my next pick. Oh god, there's so many good names that are kind of just on the same tier. Okay, this guy, I'm gonna go with this guy because of name and accomplishment. Because again, this is a guy who is maybe not the most accomplished player on his own team, but Middle Tennessee State, Pat, once upon a time, upset Michigan State, and they were led, at least in part, by a man named Giddy Potts. And I gotta draft Giddy Potts. I mean, come on. That team, I will say that team was my biggest March L ever. Because I had Michigan State winning it all. And I have never, ever in my life had my national champion lose in the first round. Yeah. It hasn't happened before. It hasn't happened since. I was in a deep, deep depression.
In that year, our friend Brett B-Dags, a frequent listener, he went 30-2 in that first round, and that was one of his wrong games. So it's like everybody had wrong. So essentially, he just had like one other game. It was something random. It was like he had like Fresno State pulling off a weird upset. I think it was something like that. But I remember that vividly. I'm like, this motherfucker just basically went 30-1 because Michigan State let us all down.
Yeah,
Michigan State let us all down. So what do I got? I got 2 picks left here. Shit, I've got 2 picks left, and I've got 3 people I really want to take.
Well, narrow it down. You burned one on Sister Jean, so that's your fault.
Oh no, Sister Jean was always. I'm gonna go with a guy. I don't think he had quite a huge run that I remember. This guy sort of was a very talented guy, but sort of faded off for some legal issues. But this guy at Ole Miss back in the day was electric. Yeah. Let's go, Marshall Henderson.
Yep. Yeah, that one's understandable. I debated Marshall Henderson. To me, he just missed my quota for like actual March success, because I believe his only tournament appearance, or notable one at least, was a 12-5 upset, so that's nothing to scoff at. Ole Miss over, I think it was Wisconsin. But overall, like 12-5s, we see that's kind of the stereotypical upset that people pick. And he didn't do anything beyond that, but I understand just
he
from
was one of the first names that popped. When I
vibes.
was just thinking about it earlier,
Yeah.
he was the second after Farouk Manesh. He was the second person that popped into my head.
Yeah, I think that's fair. All right. You got Marshall Henderson. I think I know what I'm going to do here. Let's go. There's a few of these great upset teams that have such great players that I want to touch on. Yeah, you know what, Pat? Give me Jack Golke. I'll take Jack Golke off the board here. I think strictly the 3-point shooting, in my head I was just now comparing Golke to somebody with kind of a similar resume in terms of what they accomplished in the tourney, sort of a one-and-done deal. And to me, Golke's was so iconic in the way that he did it that I'm going to go with him. I think his appearance is also very memorable, again, with the crazy hair. He looked like a Dragon Ball Z character. I think this is fourth round is an appropriate time where it doesn't feel like too much recency bias for Jack Golke.
Shout out Jack Golke. Was that the fourth round or was that the fifth?
That was my fifth pick. You're correct. It was. I am out of picks. Okay, I'm okay with that then to round my team out.
All right. So I've only got 3 mentions here left, so I'll just say Bryce Drew and Valparaiso, leading Valparaiso to the Final Four, and then becoming the coach there. I mean, that guy's synonymous with March. My first snub is the entire Florida Gulf Coast Dunk City team. I felt like that was just slightly too broad to pick, but that's because that team didn't really have a ton of standout players. That team was electric. And Andy Enfield is still riding off those coattails, however many years later. But I am going with not a player, but a duo.
Okay.
RJ and Ron Hunter from Georgia Southern State. Georgia State. That moment. Well, first of all, this game I was furious because I had Baylor in my Final Four that year. But one of the most iconic March moments in recent memory is RJ hitting the shot from the top of the key and his father just launching himself off of the stool he was on. First of all, he was on the stool because he broke his foot celebrating the Sun Belt Championship. Yep. So he had to sit on a fucking stool the whole game. And just, if you've never seen that, watch that. The video of him just draining the shot. And his father, he didn't even fall. He launched. He went up in the air. And just an absolutely iconic moment. Ron Hunter is still at Tulane all these years. RJ Hunter didn't really pan out in the league. But that moment alone, just the whole... and I feel like that has basically started this new father-son trend that everyone wanted from the DeVries, the McDermotts.
I wanted it so bad. Yeah.
Things like that. I feel like the Hunters are the greatest success story. So let's go with the father-son for my last pick.
I think that's a great one to round it out. Some guys on my list here that I didn't end up going with. Kyle O'Quinn from Norfolk State. Yep. Obviously, we mentioned him. Max Asmus I did have on here because I think his association with Oral Roberts is just... you still remember that. Sadly, didn't achieve too much at Texas, but at least got to go play at a big-time program for a little bit.
I forgot DJ Cooper from Ohio. He had a couple back in the early 2010s. I think they won a game both years in those too. But again, obviously, if I couldn't even remember him thinking about this, couldn't be be top 10 in my eyes.
Yeah. Also got Omar Samhan from St. Mary's.
Yeah.
God Shamgod, which was a little before my time to actually witness, but great name, great performance. Some guys I do remember and just didn't end up picking here. Johnny Juzang, the center of that UCLA team that made the Final Four from from first four to Final Four, just like VCU so many years back. Then I've also got Thomas Walkup from Stephen F. Austin a couple years back. I
remember him.
He was a very, very good contributor to that team. And then just a little on here, I have Jarris Lyles. He was UMBC's best player. But sadly, UMBC just one and done kind of deal and didn't really have one guy stand out above the rest. So that'll do it for our March Madness Legends draft, Pat. Let's keep our word for once and let's get to
we got at least do one here.
One or two viewer questions here that we've had sit and marinate in for weeks. All right, first question here, back to football. Who is the best case scenario for Broncos quarterback? This question from JM Maury 8. Pat, what do you think?
Time Machine John Elway. No, realistically, I think the best case scenario, and because it's realistic, is J.J. McCarthy. I think they're going to trade up and get J.J. McCarthy. I don't see them trading into the top 3 to get one of the big 3, but that has to be their plan. There is no way that they are content rolling into the season with Jarrett Stidham. I'm sorry.
Well, you look at them and you look at the Vikings and you probably think kind of the same thing. It's like, which one of them is going to be more aggressive about it? Because only one of them, I mean, unless the Vikings trade up and get a top 3 guy, because there has been rumors of them trading up with the Patriots. Maybe they get Drake May or Jaden Daniels, but I think in theory, the Broncos and the Vikings are both going to be fighting over McCarthy a little bit, and the Vikings are certainly more positioned to go get him. So I will say, look, I mean, yeah, yours is probably best case scenario. J.J. McCarthy's a better prospect than the guy I'm going to say, but I think Michael Penix is probably the best, and one of the realistic options for the Broncos at quarterback, because they can, not spend quite as much draft capital to go get a guy who looked, damn good on a national stage this year. Obviously has his weaknesses. That's why he's behind, 4 other quarterbacks in terms of ranking. But still, I think he's got a very promising future in the NFL. And then last question, what's more likely, Russ MVP with Pittsburgh or Darnold comeback player of the year with Minnesota?
This is the easiest question we've ever been asked. If Russell Wilson even gets an MVP vote for the rest of his career, I mean, we could easily see Sam Darnold pulling a Geno Smith. Not easily, but we saw it with Geno Smith. But there is a 0% chance the Russ happens. There is at least a 1% chance Sam Darnold happens.
The bar will be low, honestly, for Sam Darnold to win comeback player of the year. With how just much he's barely existed in the league for so many years, I think if he puts up 26, 27 touchdowns and 10, 11, 12 picks, that might put him in contention if he actually starts for the Vikings all year. I don't know what other players he's going to have to contend with for comeback player of the year. I haven't really looked into it. Trying to think of guys who have been hurt or whatever. Mac Jones is winning comeback player of the year. He's going to win the starting job from Trevor Lawrence and then lead the Jags to a Super Bowl. Yeah. Either way, the answer is Darnold, because Russell Wilson, spoiler alert, is not winning the fucking MVP. Okay, folks, that'll do it for this episode of Off the Bench. For Pat Gustafson, I'm Brandon Carney. We'll see you guys next week.